Ladies and gentlemen, friends, and fellow journey takers through life's intricate labyrinth, prepare yourselves for a narrative that peels back the layers of human pride, exposes the corrosive nature of blame, and ultimately celebrates the breathtaking power of resilience. This isn't just a story. It's a profound examination of how easily we can shatter what's precious when blinded by expectation, and how sometimes being cast into the deepest despair can be the very catalyst for discovering an unimaginable joy. Imagine a life meticulously crafted, outwardly perfect, yet silently crumbling under the weight of an unspoken expectation. This is where our journey begins, with Ethan and Claire Caldwell, a couple who, on the surface, epitomized modern success. Their townhouse in a leafy Boston suburb was a testament to their ambition, sleek, gleaming, a flawless backdrop to lives that seemed to hum with purpose. Ethan, sharp and commanding in finance, and Claire, brilliant and creative in marketing, moved through their professional worlds with an admired efficiency. They had achieved the benchmarks of adult accomplishment, climbing corporate ladders, acquiring material comforts, and projecting an image of effortless prosperity. Yet, beneath this polished veneer, a gnawing emptiness persisted, a silence that grew heavier with each passing year. For 5 years, their perfectly curated life echoed with an absence, the one thing they longed for, the one thing that society, family, and perhaps even their own hearts told them was essential to completeness: the laughter and patter of children. The absence of children in a marriage, particularly after a certain period, can become a crucible, testing the very foundations of a partnership. It's a challenge that many couples face, often silently, carrying a unique burden of grief, hope, and often unspoken blame. In our collective consciousness, a family unit is frequently idealized as parents and children, creating an immense, sometimes crushing, pressure on couples struggling with infertility. This societal script often leaves little room for nuance, for understanding the deeply personal, often agonizing journey that couples undertake when their path doesn't align with this picture-perfect ideal. At first, Ethan's words to Claire were warm, coated with the varnish of reassurance. "It will happen when the time is right, Claire. Don't worry." She clung to these words, a lifeline in a sea of uncertainty. She endured the endless parade of appointments, the invasive tests, the cyclical hopes and crushing disappointments. Each negative result, each month that slipped by without the coveted news, was a blow she absorbed quietly, privately, adding another invisible scar to her spirit. This silent suffering is a common thread in countless women's lives, forced to bear the physical and emotional brunt of fertility struggles, often feeling a profound sense of failure, regardless of where the biological reality truly lies. But Ethan's reassurances, like thin ice, eventually cracked under the relentless pressure from his own family. Sunday dinners, once a pleasant ritual, transformed into a minefield. His mother, the matriarch, a woman steeped in traditional expectations, became an insidious source of pain. Her sighs, the subtle shake of her head, the muttered asides. "A family isn't complete without children. Maybe you married the wrong woman, Ethan," were not just whispers. They were corrosive agents, chipping away at Claire's self-worth and seeding doubt in Ethan's mind. It's a pattern sadly familiar in many families, where well-meaning, or sometimes not so well-meaning, relatives inadvertently or deliberately amplify the stress of personal challenges. These comments, often framed as concern, are actually deeply judgmental, reducing a woman's value to her reproductive capacity. Ethan's sisters, giggling cruelly at Claire's every perceived misstep, further underscored this toxic environment. Such family dynamics highlight a chilling truth. The people who are supposed to offer unconditional love and support can become the most potent sources of anxiety and emotional harm, especially when they project their own unfulfilled expectations onto others. Initially, Ethan attempted to defend Claire, brushing away his family's barbs, a flicker of his former love still present. But with each passing year, his patience wore thin, like fabric frayed by constant friction. Frustration, left unchecked, fermented into a harshness that slowly poisoned their marriage. Arguments initially triggered by trivialities, a misplaced document, a cold dinner, inevitably circled back to the same devastating accusation. 5 years, Claire. 5 years of nothing. What good are you to me if you can't even give me a child? This is a classic example of how unmet expectations, combined with external pressure and a refusal to look inward, can transform a partner into an aggressor. Ethan, unable to confront his own anxieties or the perceived failure of his lineage, projected all of his inadequacy and anger onto Claire. He wasn't just blaming her for a biological reality. He was blaming her for his inability to meet his family's demands, for his unfulfilled sense of masculine pride. His worth, he believed, was inextricably linked to the continuation of his name, a concept deeply rooted in ancient patriarchal structures that still echo in modern society. Claire's attempts to soothe him, to find solutions, fell on deaf ears. She suggested adoption, explored new medical treatments, even proposed counseling, proactive steps born of a desperate desire to save their marriage and find a path forward. But Ethan refused, rigid in his narrow definition of family. He measured worth in children, in the direct continuation of his bloodline. Her inability to conceive became a cruel mirror, reflecting his fears and insecurities back at him. But instead of confronting them, he chose to smash the mirror, metaphorically, by attacking Claire. This unwillingness to engage in shared problem-solving, to explore alternative paths, and to seek professional help for relational strain is a hallmark of many failing relationships, where one partner's rigidity or denial acts as an impenetrable wall. Evenings grew tense, the silence in their marital bed turning cold and heavy, a battlefield of unspoken resentment and hardening hearts. Ethan began staying out late, returning with the telltale scent of alcohol, or, more chillingly, a faint trace of perfume that was not Claire's. The emotional distance was rapidly escalating into outright betrayal. Confrontations erupted, each one leaving deeper, more painful scars. "Maybe if you were a real woman, I wouldn't have to look elsewhere," he spat one night, his anger raw, uncontrolled, a venomous assault on her very identity and femininity. This statement encapsulates the profound cruelty and misogyny that can emerge from a place of insecurity and entitlement, completely disregarding a partner's humanity and reducing them to a transactional vessel. The breaking point arrived on a rainy October evening. Thunder cracked across the city, mimicking the fracturing of their relationship as rain lashed against the windows of their sleek townhouse. Their arguments spiraled, fueled by years of pent-up resentment, unacknowledged pain, and the bitter taste of unmet dreams. Claire's eyes welled with tears as she pleaded, "Ethan, please don't do this. Don't throw away everything we've tried." Her words were a desperate plea for connection, for recognition of their shared history, for the love that had once bound them. But Ethan, his face flushed with anger, slammed his fist on the kitchen counter, the sound echoing the finality of his decision. "I've wasted enough time. Pack your things. Leave. You're barren, Claire. I can't waste another day with you." These words, delivered with chilling conviction, were not just a dismissal. They were a death sentence for their shared future, a brutal obliteration of Claire's worth as a woman and a partner. He was not just ending a marriage. He was attempting to erase her, to brand her with a label that he believed diminished her entirely. Tears streamed down Claire's face as she gathered her few belongings, each item feeling heavier than the last, each step toward the door, a step into the terrifying abyss of uncertainty. The rain outside poured down, soaking her hair and clothes, but its chill could not compare to the profound ache in her chest, the shattering of a dream she had cherished. The door slammed behind her with the finality of a gavel, leaving her utterly alone in the storm, a stark metaphor for the emotional desolation she felt. She walked through puddles, suitcase in hand, past neighbors who peeked from behind curtains, but said nothing. Their silence mirrored the isolation she felt, stripped bare of the marriage she had poured her heart into, and the dream of a family she had carried for so long. This moment, raw and vulnerable, is a powerful illustration of the profound loneliness that can accompany marital breakdown, especially when one partner is unjustly blamed and discarded. It's a moment of utter loss. Yet within that despair, something quiet but resolute began to stir. Ethan had pushed her out, labeled her as defective and barren, a woman of no value to him. But in that crushing moment of abandonment, a deeper truth began to dawn on Claire. The story wasn't over. Her worth was not defined by Ethan's cruel judgment, nor by her biological capacity, nor by the absence of a child in their troubled marriage. Somewhere beyond the pain, life awaited. New chapters, new possibilities, even a love she could not yet imagine, lay ahead. She had been cast aside, but she would not remain broken. The rain stung her face as she turned the corner, and though she couldn't see the path ahead clearly, she knew one truth with unwavering certainty. She would survive. Not because she had someone to hold on to, but because, finally, she had herself. This is the crucial turning point, the moment of internal resolve that fuels all subsequent journeys of healing and self-discovery. Claire settled into a modest apartment in downtown Boston. Its walls were bare, its floors worn, a stark contrast to the gleaming perfection of the townhouse she had left. Yet it was a space that belonged entirely to her, a blank canvas upon which she could paint a new life on her own terms. She painted one wall a soft sage green, hung string lights across the ceiling, and bought a small bookshelf to hold her favorite novels. Every object she placed, every personal touch, was a quiet declaration of autonomy, a defiant assertion of her individuality. She was starting over, not out of choice, but out of necessity, and she would imbue this new beginning with her own spirit. The first few weeks were undeniably lonely. Nights were the hardest, the silence pressing against her like a tangible weight, a stark reminder of the companionship she had lost. She cooked for one, watched television shows she had ignored before, and went for long walks along the river, letting the city lights blur against her tears. This period of solitude, while painful, is often a necessary crucible for healing. It allows for introspection, for mourning, and for slowly, tentatively beginning to reconnect with one's authentic self. The initial grief of loss gradually gives way to a clearer understanding of what was lost, and more importantly, what can be gained. And so, the solitude gradually transformed into something else entirely: clarity, focus, a profound sense of control she hadn't felt in years, perhaps never truly felt in her marriage with Ethan. This transformation from loneliness to self-possession is a powerful testament to the human spirit's capacity for adaptation and growth. It was during one of these introspective walks that she met Daniel Harper, a man who would unknowingly become a pivotal figure in her narrative of rebirth. He was unloading boxes at a community center, his broad frame bending easily under the weight, his movements speaking of someone who cared more about others than himself. His quiet strength and selfless nature were an immediate, yet subtle, contrast to Ethan's self-absorbed ambition. Their first conversation was casual, a shared comment about the weather, but something in his gentle tone stayed with her, a resonance she hadn't experienced in a long time. Over the next few weeks, they kept running into each other, at the farmer's market, in the neighborhood coffee shop, on evening strolls along the bustling streets of Boston. Each encounter felt effortless, a soft rhythm she hadn't known she'd been missing, a gentle melody after years of discordant shouting and strained silence. Daniel was everything Ethan was not. He asked questions, genuinely wanting to know the answer, and most importantly, He listened. He possessed the rare and precious quality of active, empathetic listening, a stark contrast to Ethan's self-centered pronouncements. Claire found herself sharing things she had locked away, her heartbreak, the humiliation she had endured, her lingering fears. Daniel never judged. He only offered warmth, encouragement, and a quiet, unwavering belief in her inherent worth. "You're not broken, Claire. You never were," he said one evening as they watched the sun dip below the skyline, painting the city in hues of orange and purple. His words were simple, yet they resonated deep within her, echoing through the hollow spaces she had carried for years, slowly beginning to fill them with a comforting light. Their friendship deepened, organically, into something more profound. Daniel's steady presence became a sanctuary, his laughter a balm, his quiet care a kind of protection Claire had never known she needed, nor even knew was possible. He respected her pace, never pushing, only allowing love to grow authentically, like the slow, deliberate unfurling of spring blooms. This relationship, built on respect, empathy, and genuine connection, provided the antithesis to the toxic dynamics of her previous marriage, showcasing the transformative power of true partnership. As the months passed, Claire began to notice subtle, yet profound, changes in herself. She felt lighter, more confident, a quiet joy bubbling up from within. And then, unexpectedly, her body began signaling something she hadn't dared to hope for, something that had been denied to her for so long. Morning sickness arrived subtly at first, a faint nausea, a pervasive fatigue, but then came the unmistakable sign, a missed period, followed by the confirmation she had only dreamed about. She was pregnant. The moment she saw the 2 lines on the test, tears of disbelief and overwhelming joy streamed down her face. She sank to the floor, laughing and crying at once, the crushing weight of past years finally lifting, if only for a moment. This was not just a biological event. It was a profound vindication, a miracle that defied every cruel word Ethan had ever hurled at her. Daniel found her there, crouched on the bathroom floor, her face a mixture of shock and elation. Without a word, he lifted her into his arms, pressing his forehead to hers. "We're going to be okay," he whispered. "This is your life, our life, and it's just beginning." His words, simple and heartfelt, cemented their shared future, a future born of love and resilience. Pregnancy became Claire's quiet triumph, a silent but powerful rebuttal to all the accusations and dismissals. Every flutter of movement, every change in her body felt like irrefutable proof that she had been profoundly misjudged, that her worth had never been tied to someone else's pride or inability to acknowledge their own issues. For 5 years, Ethan had called her barren, infertile, a failure. But now she carried life, vibrant and undeniable, evidence that she had been unfairly blamed and cruelly cast aside. This turn of events serves as a potent reminder that life often has its own extraordinary plans, independent of human prejudice or short-sightedness. Daniel was unwavering in his support, a steadfast anchor in her journey. He attended every doctor's appointment, meticulously helped set up the nursery, painting the walls in soft, warm tones, and spoke to her belly with a tender certainty that resonated deep within Claire's soul. Their evenings were spent planning for a future she hadn't thought possible. Names for their baby, bedtime stories they would read, routines they would establish. Every decision felt shared, every worry eased by his reassuring presence. This partnership, built on mutual respect and boundless love, provided the ideal environment for Claire to heal and flourish. As her belly grew, so did her confidence. She laughed more freely, a genuine, unburdened sound. She walked with a spring in her step, finally beginning to see herself not as a woman discarded and broken, but as a woman reborn, vibrant and full of potential. The pain of the past lingered only as a faint, distant shadow, unable to diminish the brilliant light of the life and love she now embraced fully. It's a testament to the profound healing power of authentic love and self-acceptance, illustrating how profound betrayals can, paradoxically, lead to profound personal growth. Meanwhile, Ethan remained blissfully unaware of Claire's transformation. He continued to believe she was still alone, barren, and utterly broken, just as he had left her. He had filed for divorce 6 months after cruelly kicking her out, imagining the court process as a simple formality, expecting compliance and silence from the woman he deemed insignificant. But life, as it so often does, had other plans, unpredictable and wonderfully ironic. Claire's entrance into that courtroom would not only shatter every assumption he had made, but it would also become the stage for his own dramatic and very public reckoning. Ethan Caldwell had filed the divorce papers with a practiced hand, convinced of his righteousness. In his mind, it was a mere formality. The final administrative step in closing the chapter on a marriage he considered a spectacular failure, primarily due to Claire's barrenness. He walked into the Boston courthouse on that crisp March morning with a strutting confidence, wearing his usual tailored navy suit and polished leather shoes. Every movement, every gesture projected an image of control, of a man certain of his victory, a predator surveying his domain. This outward display of certainty, however, often masks deep-seated insecurities, a truth that would soon be brutally exposed. He glanced around the courtroom with a smug sense of pride, fully assuming Claire would not appear. He pictured her cowering under the weight of humiliation, too ashamed to face him or the public gaze. He had spent months, perhaps even years, convincing himself he was entirely justified in his actions. 5 years of what he perceived as a childless marriage, the endless, frustrating fertility tests, the uncomfortable and accusatory dinners with his family, all of it, he believed, had left him bitter, wronged, and entitled to his current course of action. He replayed the pointed glances, the whispered comments from his mother and sisters. "Ethan, you married the wrong woman. She can't give you an heir." With each passing year, those insidious words had burrowed deeper into his psyche, feeding the frustration and arrogance that now propelled him toward the courthouse doors, oblivious to the profound irony awaiting him. As he approached the clerk's desk, he signed in with a steady hand, scanning the room for familiar faces, finding none. There were a few spectators, other nervous individuals waiting for unrelated cases, but mostly the courthouse seemed ordinary, a mundane setting where nothing extraordinary could ever truly occur. His lawyer leaned over, whispering reminders and last-minute advice, but Ethan barely registered the words. His thoughts were fixed firmly on Claire, or rather, the absence he assumed she would maintain. "She won't show. She's too proud or too ashamed," he muttered under his breath, almost like a charm meant to reinforce his already inflated confidence. This self-deception, this unwavering belief in his own narrative, served as a protective shield against any inkling of guilt or self-reflection. He settled into the petitioner's chair, glancing down at the divorce documents. Each page confirmed what he believed to be true. Claire had no claim, no leverage, and certainly no reason to be here. He imagined the judge's gavel striking, the papers signed, his freedom cemented, a new, unburdened chapter beginning. He saw this not as an end, but as a triumphant liberation from what he considered a monumental waste of his precious time and genetic legacy. Judge Lawson entered the room, his robes rustling, commanding attention without needing to raise his voice. "We will hear the case of Caldwell versus Caldwell. Is the petitioner ready to proceed?" Ethan nodded, straightening his posture, a familiar surge of pride swelling within him, the anticipation of a courtroom victory. Everything had been meticulously lined up, perfectly orchestrated, or so he thought. He barely noticed the murmurs from the gallery, the subtle shift in energy as the courtroom waited with bated breath, anticipating the unfolding of a legal formality. Then, the doors at the back of the courtroom opened, and a hush fell over the room like a tangible wave. Ethan's casual confidence faltered, a hairline crack appearing in his carefully constructed facade. He looked up, expecting perhaps an empty hallway or a late clerk, and froze as Claire entered. She walked in with measured steps, calm, radiant, and undeniably, visibly pregnant. The air seemed to shift, charged with an electric tension. The soft clicking of her heels against the polished floor became a drumbeat of inevitability, each step a resounding declaration that echoed in the sudden, profound silence. Ethan's eyes widened in disbelief, his hands trembling violently on the table, the pen slipping from his nerveless fingers and rolling unnoticed to the floor. The murmurs from the gallery escalated into shocked whispers, and some witnesses exchanged wide-eyed, disbelieving glances. Ethan's lawyer leaned in, whispering frantically, trying to regain control of his client, of the moment, of the entire rapidly unraveling situation. But Ethan was immobilized, frozen in a state of profound shock and utter disbelief. Claire's presence was more than just unexpected. It was a powerful, undeniable declaration. The very woman he had cruelly labeled Barren, the woman he had cast aside as defective and worthless, was now standing before him, embodying life, radiating a vitality he could no longer claim, no longer control, no longer deny. The courtroom collectively held its breath, witnessing a dramatic reversal of fortune that defied every expectation. Ethan's mind raced, grappling with impossible questions. Could this child possibly be his? Had that last, desperate chance before she left somehow miraculously succeeded? Or had another man given her what he, in his arrogance, had believed himself uniquely entitled to and her incapable of producing? The uncertainty gnawed at him, leaving him unsteady, vulnerable in a way he had never allowed himself to feel. The ground beneath his feet, once so firm, had suddenly dissolved into a terrifying abyss. Ethan glanced down at the legal documents that now seemed meaningless, then back at Claire, her figure glowing with a serene power. He had imagined this courtroom as a stage for his triumph, his personal vindication. Instead, it had become an arena of reckoning, a public mirror reflecting the full, brutal weight of his misjudgment. Every cruel word he had spoken, every bitter insult he had hurled, every act of callous cruelty replayed in his mind with agonizing clarity. The realization dawned on him, sharp and piercing, of the profound, irreversible damage he had inflicted, and the preciousness of what he had so carelessly discarded. He wanted to speak, to demand answers, to somehow reclaim control of this rapidly spiraling narrative, but no sound emerged. His world had tilted irrevocably, leaving him suspended between hope, gut-wrenching fear, and a devastating realization. Claire was no longer the woman he could dominate, dismiss, or control. She was something else entirely, resilient, radiant, and capable of a life he could no longer dictate, a life that had moved on, vibrant and whole, without him. The judge's gavel echoed through the room again, grounding everyone for a moment in the formalities of law. Yet Ethan's mind was far from legalities. It was trapped in shock, in disbelief, in the sharp, unbearable pain of recognition. The wife he had so scornfully discarded was standing before him, pregnant, victorious, and utterly, irrevocably beyond his reach. The courtroom doors closed behind Claire with a soft click that resonated in Ethan's ears like a thunderclap. She walked in slowly, deliberately, her posture straight, her head held high. Her long, flowing coat, a soft, elegant drape, barely concealed the beautiful roundness of her belly, but every step she took radiated confidence, a quiet triumph that stunned everyone present. This was not a woman returning in defeat, but one arriving in victory, a testament to the unforeseen strength forged in the fires of adversity. Ethan's eyes widened, fixated on her, his hands gripping the edge of the table as though it were the only lifeline preventing him from capsizing. For 5 years, he had believed she was barren, powerless, and utterly broken. Now, that carefully constructed illusion shattered in a single, breathtaking heartbeat. A profound hush fell over the spectators. Some whispered to their neighbors, others stared in disbelief, their faces a mixture of shock and awe. The receptionist's pen hovered mid-air. The court reporter paused mid-sentence. All attention centered on Claire as she moved toward the judge's bench, each stride deliberate, graceful, and utterly impossible to ignore. Ethan's chest tightened, a vice grip of anxiety and regret squeezing the air from his lungs. His mind raced, cycling through memories of humiliation and rejection, the bitter arguments, the accusatory dinners with his parents, where Claire's worth was relentlessly questioned, the venomous accusations that had once seemed so justified in his own warped mind. And now here she was, stronger, radiant, pregnant, and entirely beyond his control, a living, breathing testament to his monumental misjudgment. The judge tapped his gavel lightly, a gentle but firm command, calling the room to order. "Order in the court. Mrs. Caldwell, please take your seat." Claire moved with care, her hand resting protectively over her stomach, a maternal gesture that spoke volumes. Ethan couldn't move his eyes from her. Every motion, every breath she took confirmed the impossible reality, the truth he had so vehemently refused to believe. She had life growing inside her, living proof that he had been catastrophically wrong all along. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering frantically, "Sir, compose yourself. This is still about the divorce proceedings. We need to focus." But Ethan heard none of it. His thoughts were consumed by the impossible reality before him. Could this child truly be his, a miraculous conception from their dying days? Or had Daniel Harper, the man he had never even considered, become the father of the life she now carried, a life that had blossomed so vibrantly without him? The uncertainty gnawed at him, making him feel smaller, weaker, and more exposed than he had ever felt, whether in a high-stakes boardroom or in the cold, silent battleground of his former home. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder, punctuated by gasps and whispered comments, people leaning forward in their seats, craning their necks to witness the unfolding drama. Ethan's mind raced desperately for solutions, for excuses, for explanations that could salvage his pride. But the truth was glaring and inescapable. Claire had moved on. She had not only survived, she had thrived. She carried life, radiant and undeniable, in her womb. Claire finally met his eyes across the courtroom, a gaze that held no pleading, no apology, only a quiet, undeniable strength, a calm resolve that pierced him to his core. Her gaze, steady and unwavering, held a story of profound betrayal, incredible resilience, and ultimate victory. Ethan's knees weakened slightly. His hands, which had been gripping the table with white-knuckled tension, shook visibly. For the first time in years, he felt the full, crushing weight of the consequences of his arrogance, his cruelty, and his monumental misjudgment. The mask of control he had so carefully maintained for so long was finally beginning to crack. The judge attempted to refocus the courtroom. "We will proceed with today's hearing. Mr. Caldwell, you may present your case." But Ethan's voice caught in his throat. Words that had been rehearsed, arguments meticulously prepared for months, fell away under the overwhelming, transformative presence of Claire. His lawyer gave him a sharp nudge, a silent command to regain his composure. But Ethan was frozen, unable to stand, unable to speak, his carefully constructed world having completely imploded. Claire's calm composure contrasted brutally with Ethan's visible unraveling. She didn't flinch, didn't falter, and offered him no reassurance, no flicker of the old affection he so desperately sought. She was no longer the woman he could control or manipulate, the woman he had once dominated. She was far beyond that, carrying both a precious child and an undeniable truth that he could no longer deny. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as the raw, unfiltered scene played out. Ethan's imagined triumph dissolved into a sickening blend of fear, regret, and the slow, dawning realization that the life he had tried to destroy had not only survived, but had flourished magnificently without him. Every eye in the courtroom followed Claire, drawn to her presence like moths to a flame, and for Ethan, every glance, every whispered comment, and every subtle movement of her rounded belly was a stark, agonizing reminder that he had misjudged her entirely. He had thrown away the one person he should have cherished, and now she was untouchable, radiant, and undeniably victorious. Ethan's knees buckled beneath him, his chest heaved, his once polished suit crumpled as his carefully constructed facade of control shattered like fragile glass. He lurched forward, ignoring his lawyer's frantic whispers, and fell to the floor before Claire, right there in the solemn center of the courtroom. Gasps rippled through the audience, the sound of disbelief punctuating every echo in the suddenly charged room. "Claire, please!" His voice cracked, trembling with raw, unfiltered emotion. "Don't go through with this divorce, please, that child. It's mine, isn't it? Please come back home." The words spilled out in a desperate torrent, unpolished, jagged, raw, and terrifyingly real. He raised his arms, reaching for her as if by sheer will he could pull her back into his grasp and somehow rewind the past, undo the irreparable damage he had wrought. Every spectator froze, the tension so thick it could be cut with a knife, suspended in the agonizing anticipation of Claire's response. This was no longer merely a legal proceeding. It was a profound human drama, unfolding in real time, exposed for all to witness. Claire shifted slightly in her chair, her hands resting protectively over her belly. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of calm resolve. She had anticipated this moment in 1,000 dreams, replaying it countless times in her mind. But seeing Ethan unravel in front of everyone, kneeling, broken, pleading, was profoundly different from anything she had imagined. A cold clarity settled in her chest, a quiet certainty that transcended emotion. Ethan's voice grew more frantic, louder, more desperate. "I was wrong. I called you Barren. I blamed you. His words stumbled into broken sobs, tears streaking his face, washing away the last vestiges of his pride. "I'll do anything. I'll change. Just please don't take this from me. We can fix this. We can fix everything." The courtroom was silent save for the heart-wrenching sound of Ethan's pleading, his voice echoing with the profound regret of a man facing the irreversible consequences of his choices. Judge Lawson tapped his gavel lightly, trying to regain control. "Mr. Caldwell, you are out of order. Rise immediately." But Ethan barely heard him, or perhaps he simply didn't care. His entire being was focused on Claire, on the child she carried, on the life he believed was slipping through his fingers, a life he suddenly, desperately, wanted back. Every memory of 5 years of failed marriage, every insult, every cruel accusation he had hurled at her, now swirled in his mind as an unbearable, crushing regret. He was confronted with the mirror of his own past, and the reflection was grotesque. Claire finally lifted her gaze, meeting Ethan's eyes directly. There was no warmth, no flicker of the old affection, only a calm, unwavering resolve that cut through his desperation. "Ethan, this isn't a negotiation. You chose this when you called me Barren and threw me out. You don't get to undo it now. The damage is done." Ethan shook his head violently, clinging to hope like a drowning man grasping at a flimsy raft. "No, you don't understand. I was blind. I see now. That child, it's mine. We can—" His lawyer tugged at his arm, whispering harshly, "Sir, stop. You're embarrassing yourself. You're making things worse." But Ethan didn't stop. every ounce of his once dominant pride had vanished, replaced by a raw, desperate vulnerability. He was on the courtroom floor, shaking, pleading with a woman who had once been his wife, desperate for a miracle that he was unequivocally not entitled to. The gallery murmured, the spectators' initial curiosity turning into a quiet awe at the raw, unfiltered display of human emotion. Some leaned forward, captivated by the unfolding tragedy. Others shook their heads, a mixture of pity and judgment on their faces, at the spectacle of a man's public humiliation. This wasn't just a legal proceeding anymore. It was a scene of profound reckoning, of raw vulnerability exposed for all to witness. A painful public catharsis. Ethan's tears fell freely, wetting the cold courtroom floor. His voice, once commanding in boardrooms and social circles, now quivered with abject desperation. "Please, Claire, I love you. I'll respect you. Just come back. Don't leave me empty-handed. I was wrong. I was wrong all along." Claire's expression remained unchanged, a stoic mask of calm determination. Her calm, unwavering gaze met his pleading eyes, but offered no solace, no hint of yielding. She didn't need to speak again. Her silence carried more weight than any words, echoing louder than any argument he could possibly make, a definitive answer in itself. The judge's gavel struck again, sharper this time. A final warning. "Mr. Caldwell, if you do not return to your seat immediately, I will have no choice but to hold you in contempt of court." Even then, Ethan stayed on his knees, his hands trembling, eyes wide and fixed on Claire, as if sheer persistence, a final act of will, could somehow bend reality to his desires. He reached toward her one last time, a silent, desperate plea, hoping, begging for her to look at him not as the man who had failed her so profoundly, but as the man she might, just might forgive. But Claire's eyes, steady and unwavering, told him all he needed to know. There would be no turning back. His pleas, no matter how heartfelt or desperate in this moment of raw realization, could not undo the choices he had made, nor erase the years of pain and cruelty he had caused. And in that moment, kneeling on the cold courtroom floor, stripped of his pride and his illusions, Ethan Caldwell realized a devastating truth. The life he had tried to control, the woman he had so carelessly discarded, and the future he had so arrogantly assumed was his forever. All of it had moved on without him. The chapter he once dominated had closed, and he was not a part of the next one. The courtroom doors opened once more, and all heads turned instinctively, a collective intake of breath. Daniel Harper stepped inside with the easy confidence of a man who belonged, not just physically beside Claire, but intrinsically woven into the fabric of the new, vibrant life she had reclaimed. His navy blazer was perfectly fitted, his tie straight, his posture relaxed, yet undeniably commanding. Every eye in the room followed him, but Ethan's widened the most, a fresh wave of shock washing over his already shattered composure. Daniel walked directly toward Claire, ignoring the scattered murmurs and curious glances of the spectators. He bent slightly and pressed a gentle kiss on her cheek, a gesture both intimate and public. A quiet, powerful declaration that this was his place now. This was their shared reality. The action was simple, yet it struck Ethan with the force of a thunderclap. His jaw dropped, his hands shook uncontrollably, and the air seemed to constrict around him, suffocating him with the weight of undeniable truth. Claire's eyes lifted to meet Ethan's, unwavering and filled with a strength he had never fully understood until this very moment. Her voice, calm and unwavering, carried clearly across the silent room, a stark, definitive pronouncement. "For 5 years you called me Barren. You accused me, humiliated me, and cast me aside. But the truth is, Ethan, it was you who was incapable." A stunned silence followed her words, thick and profound. Gasps echoed off the courthouse walls, a collective exhalation of disbelief. The audience froze, witnesses whispering amongst themselves, their eyes wide with shock and revelation. Ethan's mind reeled, his face drained of color, utterly white. Every accusation he had ever made, every cruel insult hurled in his anger and insecurity, now returned to him like a brutal mirror of shame, reflecting his own profound failure and inadequacy. He, the accuser, was now the accused, exposed, and undeniably guilty. Daniel moved slightly, his arm brushing Claire's protectively, a silent assertion of their bond. His gaze met Ethan's once, not with malice or gloating, but with a calm, unwavering certainty, almost pitying. Ethan flinched as though struck by a physical blow. Years of ingrained arrogance and deep-seated denial could no longer shield him from the undeniable scientific reality. He'd been wrong, utterly, irrevocably, catastrophically wrong. Claire placed her hands firmly on her belly, accentuating the undeniable truth of the life growing inside her, a potent symbol of her vindication. "This child is living proof that I was never the problem, Ethan. You destroyed our marriage with your pride and cruelty, and now it is too late for you to undo what you cannot reclaim." Ethan's legs buckled beneath him, and he collapsed fully onto the cold courtroom floor, a crumpled heap of broken pride and profound regret. His hands scraped against the tile as he desperately tried to hold on to some semblance of dignity, but none remained. Tears streamed down his face, blurring his vision as he realized that everything he had assumed about control, power, and judgment had crumbled in the space of a single, devastating moment. Judge Lawson banged his gavel, calling for order, but even his commanding voice could not pierce the heavy, charged silence that had settled over the courtroom. Every spectator felt the gravity of the revelation, witnessing a man's hubris unravel publicly, irreversibly. Ethan's lawyer knelt beside him, whispering reassurances, but Ethan barely heard. His mind was trapped on Claire's words, on Daniel's calm, unwavering presence, on the life and love he had so carelessly cast aside. His entire identity, once so meticulously constructed on a foundation of control and blame, now felt hollow and utterly meaningless. Claire stood gracefully, Daniel at her side, their hands interlocked, a symbol of their unity and shared future. Together, they walked slowly toward the exit. Each step carried purpose, each movement a declaration of her autonomy, her strength, her new beginning. She did not glance back, for there was no reason to. The chapter Ethan had tried so desperately to dominate had closed without him, and her life was moving forward, vibrant, whole, and imbued with a profound sense of peace. Behind them, Ethan remained on the floor, trembling, utterly destroyed by the truth that could no longer be denied. The courtroom seemed to pulse with the intensity of the revelation, the echoes of Claire's words hanging in the air like a storm's aftershock, a haunting refrain. In that moment, it became painfully clear to everyone present. A life once dismissed, a woman once maligned, had not only survived, but had flourished magnificently. And Ethan, the man who had once wielded power and pride as his impregnable shields, was left alone to reckon with the undeniable, bitter consequences of his choices, powerless to reclaim what he had so recklessly lost. But the story, as life often reminds us, was not quite over. Ethan wasn't ready to let go, not yet. He wasn't prepared to accept this crushing defeat, this public humiliation. His pride, though wounded, still clung to a desperate shred of hope, or perhaps delusion. The courthouse emptied slowly, the murmurings of the spectators drifting behind the polished oak doors until only a heavy silence clung to the walls. Ethan Caldwell sat slumped on the wooden bench, staring at the grain beneath his expensive shoes as though it might magically rearrange itself and explain what had just happened, what cataclysmic event had utterly reshaped his reality. He had frozen earlier, unable to breathe, when Claire Anderson had walked in, her hand resting lightly on her pregnant belly, her smile radiant, her eyes untouched by regret, a vision of triumphant serenity. And then Daniel Harper had appeared, brushing her cheek with the gentlest kiss, a profound gesture of intimacy that cut Ethan to the bone, and together they had walked out, leaving Ethan to collapse in his own wreckage, a monument to his shattered pride. When he finally managed to rise, hours had slipped away, and the janitor cleared his throat behind him, waiting patiently to lock up. Ethan dragged himself home, his sleek townhouse now echoing with a deafening emptiness. Once he had envisioned this place ringing with children's laughter, its pristine walls brightened with crayon drawings, Claire humming contentedly in the kitchen. Now it was sterile, too clean, a pristine showroom of what never came to be, a mausoleum of his failed dreams and toxic choices. He dropped his keys onto the counter, their metallic clatter too loud in the oppressive stillness. His own reflection stared at him from the gleaming glass door of the oven, eyes bloodshot, jaw tight, the haggard face of a man who had built his entire identity on control, but had now lost everything he had tried to grip too tightly. His phone buzzed with a message from his sister, once a staunch ally in his campaign against Claire. "You embarrassed us in court today. Don't call until you've figured yourself out." Even his own family, once his fiercest defenders, now recoiled from his disgrace, unwilling to share in his public humiliation. He had strutted for years, blaming Claire for every failed fertility attempt, using the word barren like a cruel weapon to inflict pain and assert his dominance. And then, like a cruel, poetic twist in a drama he never authored, she had turned up glowing with life, carrying another man's child. The irony was a bitter, indigestible pill. That night, sleep was an impossible luxury. He sat by the window, the blinds half drawn, drinking whiskey he barely tasted. The amber liquid burned down his throat, but it couldn't quiet the frantic, accusatory chorus in his mind. He replayed the image of Claire entering the courtroom, radiant, utterly transformed. Each time the memory surfaced, his chest tightened with a fresh wave of disbelief, then denial, then a desperate clinging hope. "It had to be mine," he told himself, the thought a desperate whisper in the dark. "She must have conceived before I pushed her out. That baby is proof she betrayed me." This delusive thought, a self-preserving narrative, began to take root in his mind, growing stronger with each passing hour. At 3 near in the morning, he grabbed an old photo album from the shelf, flipping frantically through pictures of him and Claire in better years. Holidays, birthdays, those hopeful anniversaries where they still believed things would change, still clung to a shared dream. He jabbed his finger at one of the photos where she smiled brightly at a picnic table. "You belong to me," he whispered into the empty room, his voice raw with a possessive delusion. "If you're carrying a child, it started here, under my roof." His obsession hardened by dawn. The whiskey bottle lay empty, the floor littered with paper scraps from notes he had scribbled in frustration, dates of their last intimacy, frantic calculations he thought would somehow prove his impossible suspicion. When the first pale light of day crept in, painting the room a cold gold, he felt no peace, only the chilling tremor of a dangerous obsession. In the days that followed, Ethan's behavior grew stranger, more erratic. He showed up unannounced at his parents' house, desperate to convince them of his fractured reality. "Think about it," he said, pacing their kitchen, his hands shaking, his voice strained. "She couldn't conceive with me for 5 years. Then suddenly, 6 months later, she's pregnant. It's too close. That child is mine." His father avoided his eyes, stirring his coffee with deliberate slowness, a silent acknowledgement of his son's unraveling. His mother wrung her hands, but remained silent, the shame of the courtroom still weighing heavily on them. When he demanded their support, their affirmation, they gave him none, leaving him isolated in his delusion. Back at his townhouse, he poured all his energy into building his case. He spent hours online, a hollow-eyed figure illuminated by the glow of his laptop at midnight, reading about paternity laws, DNA testing protocols, obscure court procedures. He scrolled through family court precedents, searching for any sliver of evidence, any legal loophole that could validate his conviction. His belief grew darker, more fervent with each click. He no longer saw it as a desperate hope. He saw it as a righteous quest for justice, a path to vindication. Yet beneath that fierce determination pulsed something he vehemently refused to acknowledge: guilt. He remembered the nights when Claire had cried quietly in the bedroom, turned away from him, whispering prayers he never joined. He had blamed her, called her failures a curse, without once submitting himself to examination, without once considering his own role in their marital breakdown. And now, with her belly round and full, she had turned those whispered prayers into something tangible, something beautiful, something achieved entirely without him. When sleep finally came, it was restless, fraught with anxiety. He dreamed of a hospital delivery room where Claire handed him a newborn, only to snatch it back as Daniel appeared, a cruel, recurring nightmare. He would wake drenched in sweat, heart racing, gasping into the dark. One evening, unable to bear the suffocating silence, he drove past Claire's new neighborhood. Through the windshield, he glimpsed her silhouette against the warm lamplight of her apartment. Daniel's arm was around her, a protective, loving embrace, as they arranged tiny clothes on a drying rack. The sight twisted inside him, a sickening cocktail of half rage, half despair, a brutal confrontation with the reality of her new, happy life. He pulled away before they noticed, tires crunching on the gravel, his pulse pounding a frantic rhythm against his temples. By the end of the week, Ethan knew he would not stop. He couldn't live with the gnawing possibility that the child might be his, raised by another man, while he carried the false blame for a barrenness that might not have been hers after all. He pressed his palms into the cold kitchen counter, his knuckles white, and made his final desperate decision. He would go back to court. If the system had humiliated him once, it would now vindicate him. He would demand the truth, even if it broke him further. For Ethan Caldwell, emptiness was no longer enough. He wanted proof. He wanted possession. And he would not let Claire's new life move forward without dragging his shadow across it. A final, desperate act of control. Meanwhile, in a quiet, sunlit apartment across town, Claire Anderson leaned against the nursery doorframe, a soft, contented smile gracing her lips. Daniel Harper knelt on the floor, his brow furrowed in concentration, tightening the last screw of a pristine white crib. The room smelled faintly of fresh paint and lavender, its walls softened by pale yellow tones Daniel had chosen because he said they reminded him of sunlight. Tiny baby clothes, meticulously folded, lined wicker baskets on the dresser, awaiting the arrival of their precious son. Claire's hands moved instinctively to her rounded belly, feeling the gentle flutter of a tiny kick beneath her palm. The moment steadied her, anchoring her to the vibrant, beautiful life she had painstakingly built after so much sorrow, so much emotional wreckage. Daniel rose, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow, his grin wide and boyish. "Not bad for a corporate man, huh?" he teased, brushing sawdust from his jeans. Claire laughed softly, a genuine unburdened sound shaking her head. "You're more patient with screws and bolts than you ever are with emails." He stepped close, pressing his forehead to hers, the clean smell of soap and cedar lingering on him. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen, truly cherished. Not as a failure, not as a burden, but as a woman loved completely, unconditionally, and authentically. Their days flowed with a simple, profound joy that was a stark contrast to the turbulent years with Ethan. On Saturdays, they walked hand in hand through small boutiques, picking out tiny baby shoes and soft blankets they didn't yet need, but delighted in choosing, each item a tangible promise of their future. On weekdays, Daniel accompanied her to every prenatal appointment, never once letting her sit alone in the sterile waiting room, always there to offer comfort and shared anticipation. When the doctor turned the screen toward them, revealing the fuzzy, miraculous outline of their son, Daniel squeezed her hand until her knuckles whitened, his eyes brimming with tears of overwhelming wonder. "He's perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Claire's own eyes brimmed with tears, not from fear or sorrow, but from an almost unbearable sense of wonder and gratitude. At night, when the baby stirred within Claire's womb and she shifted uncomfortably in bed, Daniel would quietly fetch warm milk, fluff her pillows, or simply lay beside her, his steady presence a comforting anchor until she drifted back to sleep. Their home vibrated with anticipation, every corner echoing with laughter and quiet, hopeful plans. Where once her world had been filled with tension, hushed arguments, and silent, damning accusations, now it breathed with light and calm, a sanctuary built on love and mutual respect. Yet, in quieter moments, Ethan's shadow sometimes crept back into her mind. She remembered the courtroom, his face blanching when he saw her belly, his voice trembling as he begged to undo the divorce. It haunted her, not because she missed him, but because she knew him. Ethan never surrendered easily. His pride had always been larger, more formidable than his love. That kind of man, she knew, would not walk away without trying to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his, or at the very least, disrupt the peace she had found. Daniel noticed her distraction one evening as they sat on the porch swing, a soft summer breeze rustling the leaves, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the distance. "What's weighing on you?" he asked gently, sliding an arm around her, his concern palpable. She hesitated, then sighed, exhaling the unspoken anxiety. "Ethan. I know he's not done. He looked at me like he was already planning his next move." Daniel's jaw tightened, though his voice remained calm, reassuring. "Let him try. The truth is on our side, Claire, and you're not alone this time." His words grounded her, pulling her back to the safety of their shared present. She rested her head against his shoulder, listening to the steady, comforting rhythm of his heartbeat. Unlike Ethan, Daniel didn't need to control her to prove his worth. He gave her space, dignity, and a partnership built on unwavering trust and profound respect. That was why she could face whatever storm Ethan might bring. She wasn't walking into it alone. Still, the call came sooner than expected. A neatly folded letter arrived by certified mail, the envelope cold and official against her fingertips. Claire opened it at the kitchen table while Daniel looked on, his gaze steady and supportive. The words were sharp, printed on legal stationery. Ethan Miller petitioned for paternity testing, claiming her child may have been conceived during their marriage. Claire felt her pulse spike, anger mixing with a profound exhaustion at his relentless intrusion. Daniel read the document, his expression unreadable, then finally looked at her. "We'll meet him in court," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "and we'll end this for good." Claire nodded slowly, her hand instinctively moving to her belly, a silent reassurance to the life inside her that none of this turmoil could touch what they were building, the serene world they were cultivating. The night before the first hearing for the paternity petition, she stood by the window of the nursery, staring at the empty crib. Her reflection in the glass showed a woman profoundly transformed. Not the frightened wife who once endured accusations in silence, shrinking under the weight of his judgment, but a mother ready to defend her child, a partner standing firm beside a man who cherished her. Ethan could drag her through courtrooms and endless paperwork, but he could never again shrink her into the shadows of his making. She whispered softly to her unborn son, words carried like a sacred promise into the quiet night. "You will never know the weight of someone else's blame. You will grow in love, not in fear." And with Daniel's steady hand resting gently against the small of her back, She turned away from the window, ready for whatever battle lay ahead, confident in her truth and the strength of their bond. The courthouse, with its familiar, lingering scent of polished wood and old paper, now seemed like a stage for the final act of this protracted drama. Its echoing halls were filled with the muted shuffle of lawyers and nervous litigants, each carrying their own burden of legal battles. Claire Anderson adjusted her elegant white maternity dress as she walked beside Daniel Harper, their hands interlocked, their steps deliberate and synchronized, a powerful visual statement of their unwavering unity. She had imagined never stepping into a courtroom again after her divorce had been finalized, believing that chapter of her life to be definitively closed. But Ethan Miller's relentless persistence, fueled by his shattered pride and desperate delusion, had dragged her back. His petition for paternity testing had been accepted, and now they faced him once more, under the stern and impartial gaze of the law, for a final, decisive confrontation. Inside the courtroom, Ethan sat stiffly at the plaintiff's table, his navy suit pressed sharply, his tie knotted with precision, a desperate attempt to project an image of composure and control. To anyone else, he might have looked outwardly calm, but his eyes betrayed him, flickering nervously as he scanned the room, unable to maintain a steady gaze. When he saw Claire enter, her figure radiant with late pregnancy, a beacon of life and serene confidence, his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The image cut into him like a sharp blade, a painful reminder of what he had lost, of the life that had blossomed so magnificently without him. It was undeniable proof of the life he once dismissed, and he clung desperately to the irrational belief that this child, this undeniable symbol of life, was somehow still his, a last vestige of his crumbling legacy. The judge, a silver-haired woman with clear, authoritative glasses perched on her nose, called the session to order. Her tone carried the weighty gravitas of authority, instantly filling the room with a profound silence, a quiet anticipation. Ethan's lawyer rose first, his voice sharp and confident, presenting Ethan's fervent claim. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Ethan Miller, stands before this court today seeking a truth he believes has been unjustly withheld. This child may very well have been conceived while my client and Mrs. Anderson were still legally married. For the sake of truth, for the undeniable right of a potential father, we respectfully request a court-ordered paternity test upon the child's birth." The plea was framed in terms of justice and truth, masking the deep-seated pride and possessiveness that truly drove Ethan's actions. Claire sat calmly, her hands folded serenely in her lap, her face composed and serene, though her pulse raced with a quiet intensity. Daniel's hand rested gently on hers, his thumb brushing lightly across her skin, a steady, grounding presence that spoke volumes of his unwavering support and their shared strength. Her attorney then rose, countering with steady conviction and an unshakable sense of confidence. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Claire Anderson has absolutely no objection to this request. She knows the truth intrinsically and unequivocally, and is entirely confident that the scientific results will speak far louder and more clearly than any baseless accusations or desperate claims. However, Mrs. Anderson also respectfully requests that if the paternity test definitively proves Mr. Miller is not the biological father, he be legally and permanently barred from any further interference in her life, and indeed in the life of her family." This was a bold and necessary move, seeking not just vindication, but an end to the harassment. The judge paused, her gaze shifting deliberately between Ethan, who shifted uncomfortably in his chair under the weight of her scrutiny, and Claire, who remained perfectly steady, a picture of calm resolve. The murmurs from the small gallery of onlookers quieted completely, hanging on the judge's every word. "Very well," the judge said, her voice clear and firm. "The petition is granted. Upon the birth of the child, a DNA test will be conducted under court supervision and, as requested by Mrs. Anderson's counsel, if Mr. Miller is not found to be the biological father, the court will ensure he has no further legal standing in this matter, nor will he be permitted to interfere with Mrs. Anderson's family life moving forward. The gavel strike punctuated her words, final yet in Ethan's mind, opening a door he fervently believed would vindicate him. He allowed himself a small, smug smile, a flicker of his old arrogance returning as he leaned back in his chair, convinced of his impending victory. To him, this was justice in motion, the legal system finally aligning with his own distorted reality. He was utterly convinced that somewhere in the convoluted timeline of their crumbling marriage, this child had been conceived under his roof, that it was his blood, his name, his legacy carried in Claire's womb. He clung to this belief with the desperate tenacity of a drowning man grasping at the last rope, a desperate attempt to hold his fractured dignity together. Claire caught his look, the self-satisfied, smug curve of his lips, and felt no fear, no apprehension. She turned slightly, whispering to Daniel, her voice soft but imbued with a quiet power. Let him smile. The truth will wipe it away soon enough. Daniel gave her hand a gentle squeeze, his calm eyes focused entirely on her, not on Ethan. Their strength came not from arrogance or a need for retribution, but from an unshakable certainty, a quiet confidence born of knowing the truth. The proceedings ended quickly, the next date for the final reveal set for after the child's birth. As they exited the courthouse, reporters and curious onlookers attempted to capture photos, but Claire kept her head held high, her gaze unwavering. She would not let Ethan's grasping pride steal her dignity again, not now, not ever. Meanwhile, Ethan left the building feeling a twisted sense of triumph, a temporary reprieve from his inner turmoil. Alone in the back of his car, he muttered to himself, his voice low and fervent, "She's lying. She has to be. That child is mine. It started with me." His reflection in the tinted window stared back, hollow and tired, but he ignored it, pushing away the inconvenient truth it reflected. His profound, self-serving pride convinced him he was unequivocally right, that justice was on his side. That night, Claire sat with Daniel at their dining table, the official letter from the court resting between them, a tangible reminder of the ongoing battle. She traced the edge of the paper with her fingertip, a faint sigh escaping her lips. "It's exhausting," she admitted quietly, the weariness evident in her voice. Daniel leaned forward, his voice steady and reassuring, a solid anchor in her emotional storm. "It's the last fight, my love. Once the truth is written in black and white, he won't be able to touch us again. He won't be able to interfere with our peace." She nodded, exhaling slowly, a profound sense of relief beginning to settle over her. The weight of years of blame and accusation still lingered, a phantom burden, but this time she felt the finish line drawing near. Soon Ethan's corrosive voice would no longer echo in her life. Soon the irrefutable truth would silence him completely, forever. In her heart, she knew this child was more than just living proof of Ethan's lies. He was a powerful symbol of resilience, of a life beautifully rebuilt from ashes, of love rediscovered in its purest, most authentic form. No courtroom, no desperate petition, and certainly no man could ever take that from her. The winter sun glared weakly through the frosted glass of the hospital entrance as Claire Anderson walked in, her newborn son nestled securely in a soft blue blanket against her chest. Daniel Harper carried the diaper bag, his free hand gently guiding her steps, a picture of quiet, loving support. Their child, barely 3 weeks old, slept soundly, utterly oblivious to the storm that had yet to fully pass, the final dramatic act of his parents' journey. This was the day the court had set for the DNA test. the day when Ethan Miller's desperate, pride-fueled claim would finally be measured against the impartial, irrefutable evidence of science. Ethan was already inside the sterile waiting room, his posture unnervingly stiff, a rigid monument to his anxiety. He wore another immaculate suit, his tie pinched too tightly at the neck, a subtle sign of his inner turmoil. His eyes darted nervously from Claire to the precious bundle in her arms, a complex mixture of hunger, desperation, and a possessive delusion flickering across his expression. When he saw the child's tiny hand peek out from the soft blanket, his chest heaved with shallow, ragged breaths. To him, that little boy represented not just a child, but vindication, the ultimate proof of his supposed righteousness. He convinced himself he saw his own likeness already, projecting his desires onto the innocent features, though the baby's face was far too new to reveal any resemblance beyond the universal innocence of infancy. The nurse, with a calm, practiced tone, called their names, leading them into a sterile room with white walls and gleaming, impersonal instruments. The tension in the air weighed heavier than the fluorescent lights that hummed steadily above, a tangible presence. Claire sat carefully in a chair, holding her son close, her maternal instinct a protective shield. Daniel stood steadfastly at her side, his shoulders squared, his presence a silent fortress of strength. Ethan entered last, his steps uneven despite his desperate attempt at composure, his internal turmoil barely concealed. The nurse explained the procedure with professional detachment. "We'll collect a cheek swab from the baby first, then from both of you gentlemen. Results will be sent directly to the court for authentication. It usually takes 2 weeks." Claire gently handed her son over for the swab, the tiny infant fussing for only a moment before quieting again, soothed by his mother's proximity. Daniel leaned close, whispering to him, "It's all right, little one. Just a quick moment." His steady, reassuring presence calmed both mother and child, a stark contrast to the agitated energy emanating from Ethan. Ethan watched every movement, his lips pressed thin, a mask of contained desperation. When it was his turn, he leaned forward sharply, almost aggressively, as though the sheer force of his will, his desperate desire, could somehow bend the truth to his will, coerce the scientific reality into conforming to his narrative. The nurse recoiled slightly at his intensity, but completed the task without comment, maintaining her professional demeanor. Daniel followed with quiet dignity, his composure unshaken, a man at peace with the truth. When the samples were carefully sealed and labeled, the nurse left them alone for a brief, incredibly tense moment. Silence stretched like a taut wire between them, thick with unspoken accusations and simmering emotions. Ethan broke it first, his voice low but sharp, laced with a familiar venom. "You can keep pretending, Claire, but when the truth comes out, you'll regret every smile you flaunted." Claire turned toward him, her eyes steady, her voice soft yet cutting, imbued with an unshakable certainty. "The only one living in pretense here is you, Ethan. This test isn't for me. It's for you, because deep down, you already know the truth." Daniel placed a hand gently on her shoulder, signaling restraint, a silent reminder to maintain her composure, but his eyes never left Ethan's, calm, unwavering, almost pitying. 2 weeks later, the courtroom brimmed with anticipation. Reporters lined the hallways, sensing a story of high drama, betrayal, shattered pride, and ultimate vindication. Ethan entered briskly, his chin lifted, wearing the carefully constructed mask of a man about to reclaim his honor, convinced of his imminent triumph. He had told himself each day, every single hour of those 2 agonizing weeks, that this was his moment. His chance to prove that Claire had, after all, carried his blood, that his legacy would be preserved. Claire arrived with Daniel, their baby left safely with her loving mother. She walked with quiet grace, her face calm, her confidence unshaken, a woman secure in her truth. Daniel's arm rested protectively along her back, a silent, powerful reassurance, their combined presence a testament to their unbreakable bond. Judge Hamilton presided, her tone crisp and formal as she called the court to order, the anticipation in the room almost palpable. The clerk handed her the sealed envelope containing the DNA results, the culmination of all the waiting, all the desperation, all the hope. The air thickened as she opened it, adjusted her glasses, and began to read, her voice steady and clear. According to the DNA analysis, Judge Hamilton stated, her voice carrying the undeniable weight of scientific truth, Mr. Ethan Miller is not the biological father of the minor child in question. The words hung in the air like a bell tolling, a profound, irreversible pronouncement that resonated through the hushed room. Ethan's face crumpled instantly, the carefully constructed mask shattering into 1,000 pieces. His mouth opened soundlessly, a choked gasp, his hands gripping the edge of the table until his knuckles turned bone white. The gavel had not yet struck, but the verdict had already sentenced him to his own harsh reality. Daniel reached for Claire's hand beneath the table, squeezing gently, a shared moment of relief and quiet triumph. Claire exhaled slowly, the immense weight of 5 years of false blame, of cruel accusations dissolving in that single, definitive sentence. Finally, she whispered to herself, a soft, almost inaudible exhalation of pure liberation. The judge continued, her voice firm and resolute. Given this unequivocal result, Mr. Miller has no legal claim whatsoever to the child, nor will he be permitted to interfere in Mrs. Anderson's family life moving forward. This matter is now closed. Gasps rippled among the onlookers, a collective exhalation of shock and understanding, but Claire did not turn to them. Her gaze remained steady, forward, unmoved, her focus entirely on her own newfound freedom and peace. Ethan slumped into his chair, shoulders hunched, his face buried in trembling hands, a picture of utter devastation. His world, built on a foundation of pride, accusation, and self-deception, had finally collapsed under the irrefutable truth of science. For Claire, the moment was not one of gloating or vengeful satisfaction, but of profound release. The truth had finally spoken, louder than all his cruel words, louder than years of blame and humiliation, louder than any lie he could ever conjure. Her freedom and the integrity of her new family was now undeniable, irrevocably established. The courtroom emptied slowly after Judge Hamilton's final, resounding gavel strike, but Ethan Miller remained hunched at his table, utterly motionless, a solitary figure in a suddenly empty space. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, urging him to stand, to leave, but Ethan could not move. The shuffling of papers, the scrape of chairs, and the murmurs of strangers leaving all blended into a hollow, deafening echo inside his head. Every sound, every lingering presence reminded him of the crushing verdict he could not escape. The child was not his. The 5 years of bitterness, the cruel accusations, the endless self-serving pride, it had all been built on a lie he had meticulously crafted to shield himself from his own inconvenient truth, his own inadequacy. He finally lifted his face, streaked with tears, and glanced toward the exit. Claire Anderson was already walking out, a vision of serenity and strength, Daniel Harper faithfully by her side. They did not look back, not even for a fleeting second. She carried herself with the poise of a woman who had not only survived the most brutal storm, but had found profound peace and flourishing joy on the other side. Daniel's quiet strength, his arm gently guiding her, only emphasized how far Ethan had fallen, how utterly alone he now was. When Ethan returned to his townhouse that evening, the silence struck him harder, more profoundly than ever before. The sleek, modern furniture gleamed under the dim lights, untouched for months, as though the space itself refused to comfort him, reflecting his inner emptiness. He poured a glass of whiskey, his hand trembling so much that the liquid splashed onto the polished counter. He didn't drink it. He simply stared at the glass until his vision blurred with unshed tears, then set it down, untouched. The man who once thrived on control, who defined himself by his dominance, had lost all sense of direction, all purpose, all meaning. In the days that followed, the devastating news of the DNA results spread quietly but inexorably among family and friends. Ethan's mother, once so quick to call Claire Barren, could not face the profound shame. She refused to answer his calls, embarrassed not by Claire, but by the very son she had so fiercely defended, by his public humiliation and undeniable cruelty. His sisters avoided him, their once cruel whispers now replaced by a chilling, judgmental silence. At work, the unshakable confidence he had always projected faltered, then crumbled entirely. Colleagues noticed his distracted mind, his late arrivals, his plummeting performance. Clients, ever attuned to success and stability, subtly pulled away, unwilling to trust a man so obviously unraveling, a man whose carefully constructed facade had publicly shattered. Meanwhile, Claire's world blossomed with vibrant, unadulterated joy. She and Daniel brought their baby boy home, their sanctuary. The nursery, painted a soft sky blue with tiny stars scattered across the ceiling, became a haven of peace and new life. Every tiny cry, every contented coo, every sleepy, innocent smile filled their small home with a kind of exquisite music Claire had once believed she would never, ever hear. Daniel would come home from work, loosen his tie, and immediately scoop up the baby, his laughter echoing warmly through their home, a sound of pure contentment. Claire, watching from the doorway, felt the ache of old wounds slowly, gently fade, replaced by a steady rhythm of boundless joy, love, and profound gratitude. She thought of Ethan sometimes, but only in passing, a distant, fleeting memory. The court had ordered him never to disturb her family again, and she trusted the finality of that judgment, a legal shield protecting her newfound peace. His shadow, once looming so large and menacing, had finally lifted, replaced by the brilliant sunshine of her new life. What remained was freedom. Freedom to love without fear, to raise her son without blame or judgment, and to move forward without regret, her past finally, definitively behind her. Ethan, left utterly alone, wandered aimlessly through the hollow, empty rooms of his townhouse. Nights stretched endlessly, his mind relentlessly replaying every cruel word he had once thrown at Claire. Barren, he had called her. Fruitless. Now those words mocked him in the suffocating silence, echoing back with every step he took across the polished floor, a haunting chorus of his own making. He realized, far too late, with a crushing weight of regret, that the love he had so carelessly destroyed was the only real treasure he had ever known, the only genuine connection that had held his fractured world together. Claire, on the other hand, woke each morning not to silence and despair, but to the sweet sound of her baby's cries and Daniel's gentle hum as he lovingly rocked him back to sleep. Their home was not grand, not ostentatious, not even perfectly pristine, but it was full of laughter, full of tenderness, full of unwavering hope. Laughter had replaced silence, tenderness had replaced bitterness, and hope had gloriously replaced despair. The life Ethan had tried so vehemently to deny her had become her greatest truth, her most profound blessing. And so their paths diverged completely, irrevocably. Ethan Caldwell collapsed into the desolate shadows of his own making, stripped of excuses, left with only his pride in ruins, a bitter, lonely reckoning. Claire and Daniel, hand in hand, rose into the glorious light of a future built on unwavering trust, profound respect, and the sweet, innocent cries of a child who symbolized not only life and boundless love, but ultimately, profound redemption. The moral lesson of their story is clear, stark, and universally applicable for all who witnessed its dramatic unfolding. Never, ever let pride, unchecked impatience, or callous cruelty destroy what genuine love could heal, what true connection could build. Never project your own fears, your own inadequacies, your own unfulfilled desires onto another, and never, ever blame others for what you refuse to acknowledge or face within yourself. In the end, truth always, always reveals itself, shining a light on the darkest corners of deception, and in doing so, it always sets the right people free. It liberates those who have been wronged, and it delivers a just, though often painful, reckoning to those who have inflicted pain. So, what do you think, viewers? Could Ethan have handled things differently, or was Claire's strength, her ultimate triumph, an inevitable force that would have emerged regardless? Remember, your worth is not, and never will be, defined by anyone else's judgment, their limitations, or their cruelty. Stand strong in your truth, love yourself fiercely and unconditionally, and never ever let pride or the cruelty of others block your path to genuine happiness and profound fulfillment. Comment below, what would you have done if you were Claire? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that hit close to home. Stories that explore the incredible complexities of the human heart and the enduring power of the human spirit.